I said at the beginning of the series that we'd talk about that fifth common response, tell an adult later. Well, here we are. On the surface, tell an authority figure looks like a social brain response. You're connecting to someone and asking for help. What makes it more complicated is that what you get in response could be one of two completely opposite things. In early elementary school, where the message tell your teacher is most emphasized, doing so is a way for a kid to get coaching in how to use their social brain. Good elementary teachers focus on facilitating conversations between kids, encouraging them to empathize, and helping them learn social skills that are quite complex and take time and practice to develop. In other situations, reporting to an authority figure means something very different. Instead of someone sitting everyone down to help sort things out, it triggers an investigation to determine whether the guilty party has done something sufficiently bad that they deserve being hurt. Instead of you lashing out or doing nothing, the authority figure decides whether to lash out or do nothing. It's basically an institutionalized survival brain. It doesn't ask about what the victim needs or identify creative ideas to repair or prevent the harm. It's solely focused on, is the perpetrator bad enough to justify punishment? Its theory of action is that hurting someone badly, often in a fairly arbitrary way, is the best way to persuade them and others not to do something again. And if that doesn't work, the belief is that what is needed is to increase the severity of punishment in order to scare people more. Unfortunately, what this ends up doing is distorting something that does have truth to it, that human beings learn from negative social consequences, into something that we would not expect to be effective. The harsher a punishment is, the less robust to error it is. Because punishing an innocent person would be a grave miscarriage of justice, formal processes to determine punishment devote the vast majority of their time and resources to parsing out the exact details of what happened in the past and whether the harm done was justified or can somehow be excused. Almost no resources are invested in the current needs the victim has for safety, healing, or support. And the victim has almost no power to shape the process, access creative solutions other than hurting the perpetrator, or get anything done until the investigative process is finished, which can take months. In a significant number of cases, the final resolution of the process is to do nothing. And even when the bully is punished, the punishment might hurt them, but it doesn't typically lead to a better experience for the victim. In fact, initiating a formal process often increases harm to the victim. When a bully is targeted for an investigative process that could lead to them experiencing significant harm, the very people we identified in the power mapping video as the ones most able to get the bully to change, namely their friends and loved ones, are incentivized to circle the wagons to defend and minimize the behavior rather than working with you to get the perpetrator to knock it off. Similarly, to the extent that community members identify with the bully in some way or fear that they could be seen as similarly guilty, there is a strong incentive to make an example out of the victim in order to deter people from coming forward in the future. All of this severely inhibits the very actions that could most quickly and easily fix the problem. These are actions, like the ones we've discussed previously, that are immediate, low stakes, and robust to error. Effective negative social consequences can be as simple as the bully saying something to their friends for laughs, only to have their friends look at each other with concerned expressions and be like, "Did you really say that?" If all of a bully's friends do some variation of that consistently for a week, the behavior is done. Very few people can persist in a behavior in the face of consistent, even minor disapproval from people they care about. So when thinking about how to use negative consequences, one thing that can be useful is what I call the doctrine of limited consequences. Often when we think about consequences, we think about it in a very binary way. Someone is good or bad, innocent or guilty. Either nothing happens to them or they deserve anything that's done to them, no matter how horrible. In contrast, the doctrine of limited consequences simply states that it is important that people experience the consequences of their actions and that those consequences have limits. Mostly, I talk about this in the context of arguing that there are certain things that are never a deserved consequence, regardless of what someone has done. Death, being forced to give birth, things like that. But the flip side is just as important. If the only consequences available are ones that are outside the bounds of what the community thinks is acceptable, then it ends up shielding people who are doing harm from experiencing any consequences at all. And that's a problem. There has to be a set of minor consequences where people are like, well, you were mean to him and now he doesn't want to be around you. That's fair. It's really important to be deliberate about these and think through them consciously, though, because we live in a culture that has invested very heavily in using identities like race and gender to create narratives that certain people deserve certain harms, often very extreme ones. Death penalty for not being submissive enough to a cop, for example. And when you actually spell out those assumptions and ask people to think them through consciously, it's obvious that they're ridiculous. But until then, they have a huge impact on people's behavior and what they'll justify. So when involving authority figures, it's important to be clear about what you're asking for and what you're likely to get. Many people who are drawn to positions like teaching or coaching have naturally strong social skills or additional training, such that they make great mediators and can really help people be able to do better with those social brain skills. Or they might be limited to using their personal or institutional survival brain. Everything we've learned about social and survival brain applies, whether we're talking about your brain or someone else's. Now, in the next video, we'll talk about something that makes all this brain work easier, how you can help create a culture that discourages bullying in the first place.